I had an English teacher who suggested that if you don't know where to start, an easy choice is the opening line from the extract. So let's pick apart the opening first scene of Fleabag. What do we learn? What's established? What's continued throughout? The theme of sex and lust seeps through almost every episode of this show, and is fittingly the first theme that we're introduced to. This show spends a lot of time on Fleabag's sex life, and we're given a purposefully intrusive look at her feelings about her body, as well as the comments that others make, such as one of her many flings, or from the first episode, the stepmother.
She's just a...
With sex comes connotations of sexual assault at certain points in the show, and there are a couple of ways to present this. You could take the Gaspar Noé approach and dedicate an entire 10 minutes to a bleak and difficult to watch violent event, a sequence of events I'm still not entirely sure how I feel about due to its sheer magnitude. You could take the stupid, dumbass, insulting approach most anime take, where rape is basically just softcore porn. Or you could take the Fleabag approach. Fleabag keeps us inside of the titular character's head, effectively communicating how she feels about her body, because that's all that should matter in this situation. It doesn't matter that her body isn't being scanned from head to toe, we don't need that. All that matters in the script, and all we need to know about the character, is how she feels herself. On top of that, the way bisexuality is handled is appropriate, respectful, and not preachy at all in the slightest.
Are you a lesbian? Not strictly.
From what I can remember, it's only brought up once, very briefly, and just sort of left for us to infer for the most part. Which is really nice and displays a clear respect for the intelligence of the watcher. Lots of disappointing sex with men and the occasional pursuit of women, and it all makes total sense. To summarize, the display of sex underpins the entire show, but impressively nothing about this show is sexualized or attempts to be sexy. Aside from the priest, but we'll get to that. Now the main thing this opening scene does is introduce Fleabag herself. I think she's a revolutionary character who is acted out brilliantly by Phoebe Waller Bridge. Leading ladies are supposed to be likable or redeemable in some way, and what I like about Fleabag as a character is that she's interesting and compelling without being a good person. She's not evil, she's not even particularly malicious, but to me she represents the ugly parts of our own everyday nature, and that's why she's so much fun to watch. And then, of course, when she does something that transcends her own nature, such as when she acts out of genuine love for her sister Claire, it's satisfying. I'll be focusing on this character heavily, of course, as I analyse the show. The first scene is also ultimately just one big setup for this punchline.
Do I have a massive asshole?
It doesn't really do it for me, and I think the show's sense of humour is usually a lot better than this. I won't focus on the comedic aspects too much though, because humour is notoriously difficult to talk about. The fourth wall breaks are also thrown in at the start of the show and have become probably the most popular part about it. I don't think the show would be nearly as big without them. And whilst I don't think the usage of these intimate connections with the audience is as genius as many make them out to be, there's certainly a creative way of displaying a character's development. And what really makes them is the perfect performance that Phoebe gives us. They're also a nice callback to the roots of the show as a one-man stage performance. I think this first episode of Fleabag does a good job introducing what the show is all about, and also contains a somewhat playful tone with some foreboding bits of backstory elements, all in hindsight with the clear intention of creating a sense of security by which to subvert as the chronology continues. Whilst I certainly enjoy the show, one thing you'll notice is that I consider the first season to be significantly stronger than the second for reasons I will get into. It's not often you see a show where the hopeless romantic isn't the protagonist, and by portraying them as the pursuer who isn't disguised with main character armor, you see how strangely pathetic it is. I want to focus on the show's portrayal of men for a second.
I'm gonna say I just let the guy who was finished your face.
More specifically Harry and the father. This father, not that one. Fleabag's dad is part of an older generation that as a man was socially conditioned to bury his emotions, and as a result finds it extremely difficult to emote naturally as both a man and a father.
I know we've had our... Because I have the feeling in here, so I just want to say very much. And that's it.
And whilst yes, it does lead to some charmingly humorous and awkward interactions, it also makes his successful earnest moments that much more powerful and pleasant to view, such as episode 5's memorial of Fleabag's dead mother. Although the stepmom ruins all of these scenes.
Yes, my ex did a similar thing, voices and fun. Really, really funny man. Really funny. Can I help you with the food?
God, they really just can't let this family catch a break. I mean, fuck me, I know the point is that we're supposed to hate this character, but Olivia Colman almost does too good of a job at being such a relentless, passive-aggressive cunt. Harry is on the other side of the extreme. He's part of the younger generation where his emotions are far more acceptable. However, of course, it would be extremely unrealistic to go from powerful opposition to emotions straight to healthy ones in just a few decades. Men as a whole in real life are still trying to figure out the correct balance, and Harry seems to be too emotional. He's the aforementioned hopeless romantic who, if the story was told through his perspective and a more generic group of talents, would be seen as a suave and irresistible fella. But through the lens of Fleabag is hilariously uncomfortable and cringy. But also, funnily enough, one of the most moral people of the first season. And don't get me wrong, he's utterly hilarious, but fuck me is he cringy. As I'm sure he was meant to be. By the way, this great subversion of the archetypal romantic makes for one of my favourite jokes in film, period.
No. What I really want to do is this. What's that?
Sorry, nothing happened!
I was trying to be sexy.
Sorry, no, it was really sexy.
Was it?
Fleabag is constantly trying to work her way through the wall of male egos, from the strange dude on the bus, who was completely hilarious by the way, I enjoyed every second of his portrayal, to the awful Martin, who goes further than just being an intentionally immoral character, and slightly peeks into the realm of a badly written one. The sort of over-exaggeration that works well for a one-man show, but not so much for an actual TV show. I think he's without a doubt my least favourite character in this first season. His black and white, almost cartoony and over-exaggerated nature is completely at odds with the realistically flawed and interestingly varied group of individuals that rule the show. I could say a similar thing for the stepmother too, whose crassness I wasn't a particular fan of, but she has far less screen time and also makes a lot more sense. You understand why she's in the relationship she's in, and she contributes to the family dynamic of which Fleabag is written as somewhat of a punching bag, especially in season 1. In Martin's case, I have no fucking idea why Claire is with him until the final fucking episode. It makes no sense at all, and I don't buy the whole he makes me laugh thing. It's just not a viable or well-written excuse. Yet again, I'm sure it works in the one-man show, but not here. I think it would have been a better idea to emphasize the effects the divorce would have on Jake, as well as just the difficulty and implications of getting a divorce. I mean, those aren't perfect either, but they're just completely neglected. My favorite episode of the show is probably season 1, episode 4, which if you don't remember is the one about the silent retreat. The writing is just flawless in this one. There's a poignant juxtaposition with the point of the men's retreat and the actions of Fleabag. The constant screeching of derogatory terms amuses Fleabag, who completely misses the point of the exercise.
Yes?
There's a time and place for running your mouth, for letting all of your emotions out and saying the things you want to say. The men want to yell at Patricia for getting a raise, but they know they shouldn't, so they don't.
Well done, Patricia.
Fleabag, on the other hand, is the complete opposite of this mindset. She has very little sympathy and self-awareness for those around her, constantly prodding Claire and taunting her about the vibrator.
If you want to have a wank, I can give you some space.
Oh my god.
Joking about the absurdity of the silent retreat with no sense of shame at any point. Even in the episode right after this one, bringing up Claire's promotion despite knowing that it will do no good at all. The bank manager scene is probably my favourite interaction in the show.
I want to take clean cups out of the dishwasher, put them in the cupboard at home, and the next morning I want to watch my wife drink from them.
Finally, Fleabag decides to shut the fuck up, whilst the manager says everything she wants to say but can't. We're yet to see any emotion from this protagonist. All she's really done is exploit people and be juvenile. We know there's a deeper meaning to her actions, but she has completely failed in maintaining her healthy mental stability. In many ways, this interaction is the start of her shift from terrible person to slightly less terrible person, as I was wincing at the thought of the two sleeping together, and it was a very pleasant surprise that they didn't. Although, Fleabag still offers him one breast to grope, as it's the only way she knows how to handle human interaction. And then there's also the gorgeous escalation of the simple line,
I just want to cry.
to her total emotional outpour towards the same character at the end of the season. The episode ends with Claire leaving the retreat with no explanation, leaving Fleabag with an existential sense of loneliness and behooving her to call boo, just to hear her voice and create an illusion of comfort and friendship. Right now, she doesn't really have any friends, and has continued to use sex and fourth wall break conflict as a coping mechanism. She still needs us. Perhaps the consistent shakiness of the camera, often shown through very strange perspectives, is representative of us as viewers holding it and following her on our journey, like a documentary where the camera needs to be hidden at point. The end of episode 5 for me is a particular moment that displays the growth the two sisters have gone through so far. I enjoy how their arc doesn't resolve in one episode, as is so common, instead growing day by day, very slowly, which is a much more realistic interpretation of people in their late 20s, early 30s. This type of pacing is a lot less common because it's a lot harder to write, but if there's one thing Bridge can do, it's write. The hug, for example, is the clearest display of growth as it recalls the failed hug in episode 1. By the way, I love Claire. She is amazing. For whatever reason, I thought she was a little bland when I first watched the show, but among this rewatch, she's become one of my favorites. I've been slightly dodging the topic of Boo because her character was slightly underdeveloped in my opinion. They could have done a slight bit more with her character, and the emotional beats didn't really hit me as hard as I'm sure they hit most of this series' viewers. But the way that this revelation is filmed is technically masterful and genuinely genius. Things as subtle as Fleabag looking at the camera more than ever, not saying anything but glancing at us over and over, almost as if she's begging us to help her out, like we have any bearing on the events of the show, displaying her utter hopelessness. Like the stepmother said, the purpose of sex fundamentally is to reproduce, and yet in this case, it led to the death of a close friend. For one of the only times in the show, there's non-diegetic music, but not traditional music, more eerie sound effects and symbols, all completely unarranged and purposefully chaotic to get across just how muddled the mind of the main character is, as well as just create a super creepy vibe. Fleabag literally runs away from us, scared of what we might think, and is shown in red light, obviously connoting her as a villain. The oldest piece of symbolism in a book, but a useful one nonetheless. Look at this little gem where Fleabag and her father are discussing how different they are from one another, and they go on to scratch their noses in discomfort almost simultaneously. God, I love that shit. It's like honey to my needlessly critical eye. The dad is my favourite character, by the way. He's so cute. I adore how wise he is, but how he just isn't able to display his life experience and teach the lessons that he yearns to. Both because of a stepmother who is implied to be emotionally abusive, and also his position as an older— Oh, fuck off, you prick! You know, one of the reasons I make these videos is that they help me understand the media I love. I probably wouldn't have rewatched Fleabag if it wasn't for this essay, but I enjoy it so much more after looking at it with the intent of recording my thoughts. And I never noticed the consistent interruptions from the stepmother every time a genuine emotional connection is made with the family. The final scene of season 1 was very nice and wholesome. We finally learn that Fleabag is simply fearful of what many women at her age are afraid of. Growing old, running out of time, running out of options, passing her prime, doomed to be lonely, resenting anybody who doesn't want to fuck her. It reveals that the reason for her sexual activity was for validation, and so when people show no interest, it triggers her insecurity of being unwanted. But when faced with the manager who is the exact opposite, he has his life together. He has a long-term partner, children, and doesn't look too shabby either, but also has no interest in fucking Fleabag, the type of person you'd think the titular character would detest, yet they connect. Then the season ends. Even if this eventual twist that Boo's boyfriend slept with Fleabag was pretty predictable, it hardly matters due to the way that it's presented. Speaking of which, before we move on to season 2 in the next video, let's talk about Fleabag's presentation. I have a soft spot for British television filmed in a charmingly raw fashion. In-Betweeners, Peep Show, The Office, and countless others, and Fleabag is certainly comparable to these shows in terms of sheer quality. The camera particularly is usually handheld, and the music is often ignored in place of ambient, which sometimes sounds just a tad too artificial, but that aside, when music is used, the show has some straight bangers! I mean, this main theme gets me hyped every time. I would strongly recommend for anyone who enjoyed season 1 to watch the original stage performance. It's very impressive, faithful, and entertaining. Bridge really is a blessing to the domain. I was originally planning on talking more about the one-man show, but instead I'll just recommend this video by Thomas Flight, who makes some really apt comparisons. So, I was gonna do both seasons in one video, but recently I've just finished watching the 3rd season of just one of the worst shows I've ever seen in my life, and I have to make a video on it. So, in between this Fleabag video and the next one, you'll get that one, but it'll come soon, I guess. I'm not sure. It won't be long.